A lot of great discussion going on today about Sunday play, football only, where BYU stands. We now introduce Blaine Fowler, get his opinion on all of this. And you brought in The Universe, which is the newspaper here at BYU.
You guys said, so I held this up,
Yeah.
and you both commented as soon as I sat down, when's that going to be an exclamation point instead of a question mark?
There's a question mark.
Hey, maybe in a few weeks, I'll bring another one in. And Nate Cunningham wrote a great article in The Universe and really lays it out. So let me one paragraph here. So this is Cliff Kingsbury, the head coach of Texas Tech. This is what he told ESPN.
He's so dreamy.
And Nate quotes him. He says, he envisions a new Big 12 members that are very competitive, have a solid fan base that can play on a national level, as well as being a team that people are interested in that can come in right away and add value to the conference. And they're talking about football. There's only one team.
And it's not Tulane.
There's only one team. That really does that has a national fan base, that adds credibility, that has the kind of history. Some of these other programs are interesting because I do believe, Matt mentioned as he was on with you guys, that some of these programs, if you give them the influx of financial boost, they're going to get $25 to $30 million, that they may be able to step up and become more of a national story. But right now, the only one that fits all the criteria that the league itself laid out right from the beginning is BYU. They should be the obvious number 11, and I think the discussion is about who 12, 13, and 14 are.
That makes so much sense, yet logic hasn't dictated the
Please
governance.
Bring common sense into this.
Yes, if common sense plays it. So we've been talking about Sunday play. Tom Hommel says we think that this can be worked out. We broke it down by the numbers. Women's soccer, every third game's on a Sunday. That's the highest percentage. Men's hoops, 0 games. Women's volleyball, 1%. Why wouldn't this be able to be worked out? And this shouldn't be a factor.
It can be worked out, and that's the reason all along BYU and the folks around BYU have felt that the Big 12 is a better fit than the Pac-12, is because it's going to be easier to work out. And the regular season is a no-brainer. You just, even if they're going to play a regular season game, BYU doesn't have to be on the schedule in a regular season game. And we're talking about a couple of conference championship games in the past that have been played, but never in football, not in basketball now. And so this is something that absolutely can be worked out. And here's what's interesting. All of the national pundits that commented on this in the first week, a lot of people said, well, BYU is going to be difficult to deal with primarily because of the Sunday play thing. Knee-jerk comments without doing their research. And almost all of those now that they've had a chance to settle in and start to look at the criteria objectively and actually look at this Sunday play thing and go and do exactly what you guys did and go, oh, wait a minute. This isn't that big of a deal. This is less of a big deal than most people originally thought it was, and it can be worked out. So I don't think that that's going to be a big deterrent for BYU, and I believe that the Big 12 is looking for full inclusion for the teams they're looking at and not for football only.
Since last week, since this really blew up after the Big 12 Media Day meetings were done, Tom Hommel has been very public, expressing BYU's interest in joining the Big 12. How do you think those comments are being received?
I think very well. And here's the thing. I think that Tom Hommel and Kevin Worthen and all the people around the BYU administration have been working on this behind the scenes for a long time. Now that the Big 12 has made it public, I think BYU very strategically, with a plan, has said, okay, now it's time for us to come out and publicly let it be known that we're working on this, that we want to be a player. When everybody else is lining up and Memphis saying, hey, FedEx is going to sponsor the bowl game, the championship game, and the governor of Texas is saying, hey, rah, 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 how about Houston? And we do need that land down by Houston for expansion of
by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, we need that too. So everybody's stepping up. Cincinnati's stepping up. I think that BYU just strategically said, okay, we've been quiet. We've been strategically working behind the scenes. Now it's time to let this kind of out. And I think that now a lot of the national folks have come around. Those that analyze college football and those that are now doing the research have gone, okay, BYU's shown an interest. They're coming after this. Let's look at it objectively. From a national fan base perspective, from the financial impact that they would have on the league immediately, from a respect level, from an ability to compete. On a football basis, it's not even close. And now you look at overall athletic programs, because if what the Big 12 really wants is overall programs, then it's even more obvious that it's BYU.
BYU is the best non-Power 5 athletic program in the country. Every year, if you take the Learfield Sports standings, BYU finished 30th. Way above a lot of these Power 5 programs. Also, I argued in the opening segment that not all flaws are created equal. If Sunday play is a big flaw on BYU's part, what's more of a flaw? UConn football historically, the way they perform on the field, or Sunday play? You can figure out some schedules for some Olympic
any
sports.
Of the other programs that are talking about national football, historically. Some of these teams have been good recently, and they've had
Memphis
years
last
here and
2
there.
years. Before that, they stunk.
Yeah, and Cincinnati's had a year or two here and there.
Went to a BCS
yeah, and
game.
Houston's been good, better as of late.
Won a BCS.
Right. And so if you look at these other schools, yeah, they've had a flash, but none are even close to the history that BYU has. And you think about national perspective. Name me a player from Cincinnati that's a great player historically. And go to New York and ask somebody that. Go to Oklahoma and ask somebody that. Name a great Houston player. I mean, I can come up with a couple of Houston players. Yeah, so we can come up with a couple. Name a BYU player. Immediately, everyone in the country says, well, Steve Young, Hall of Famer. Hey, Jim McMahon. So BYU's players that have gone on to play in the NFL, they've had some unbelievably visible players. Players that transcend just people that are interested in football. People that are casually interested in football know who Steve Young is and they know he went to BYU. Yeah. Casual, if they're old enough, if they were around in 85 to watch the Bears, they know who Jim McMahon was. Whether you're a big-time football fan or not, you know who Jim McMahon is. You don't know who Andre Ware is unless you're a football fan. And so BYU has had players that have been in the national spotlight that transcend just diehard football fans. They're much more of a national name. When I go back to New York, which I do all the time, and talk football with friends, they know who BYU is. BYU is much more of a national name than the University of Utah is up the street. They couldn't name players. Most people don't even know that Alex Smith is a Utah guy.
Most people think they're the same school.
Yeah,
and most people combine them, actually.
And they are not.
And so it's going to be really hard for the Big 12 to exclude BYU when the commissioner came out and basically laid out the criteria by which they were going to evaluate these teams. Once he did that, he almost painted himself into a corner because if they don't invite BYU, there's going to be a lot of questions about, whoa, what went on here?
Yes.
This is the criteria you laid out. So there's been a lot of crazy politics going on behind the scenes, and this isn't what you said you were going to do.
Well, that's a perfect segue because you mentioned the Texas politics, and because it has been an issue in the past for BYU getting into the Big 12, how much of a concern should the Texas politics that we're hearing about be in terms of an unfavorable result for BYU?
I think that the Texas politics that are being played are going to have an impact on the second, third, and fourth teams that get added into the Big 12, not to the 11th team that gets added. I think BYU is so obvious for the 11th that has to be the case, and whether Houston becomes one of those that second, third, or fourth pick may be impacted by the politics in Texas. I think that going into media days and into the vote that they were going to have, there were some that thought they might get 8. It might be an 8-2 vote for expansion, simply because Texas, I think, opposed expansion because it really didn't benefit them that much. There's already a big gap between revenue for Texas because the Longhorn Network and all of their merchandising and everybody else in the league, even Oklahoma. And so for Texas, it's like, hey, we don't need any extra dollars, and there's a big gap. So this isn't good for us. I think that in the long run, Texas finally said, you know what, we need to do what's best for the league. And even if it closed the gap financially, we're on board. Once that 10-0 vote came out and Texas was in, I don't think Texas opposes BYU. I think Texas at first just opposed expansion. Now that they're in for expansion, I think they would support BYU in that, but I think they also support Houston. And more than one team's going to get in. Likely 4 are going to get in.
Blaine Fowler's on BYU Sports Nation. I quickly looked up some Cincinnati famous athletes.
Okay, thank goodness, yes.
Sandy Koufax went to the University of Cincinnati on a basketball scholarship originally.
Did not know that.
That's big time.
Yeah,
that's big time.
Football, I couldn't find anybody. Oscar Robertson, of course.
Yeah,
played basketball there.
Their basketball program stands on its own merits, but really this is about football.
Right, exactly. Our Twitter question was this, talking about Sunday play. If it was that big of a concern for the Big 12, what would your reaction be to a football-only invite?
I would not be happy about it because I think BYU belongs in that league for all sports, and I think that every one of BYU's sports brings value to the Big 12. I think they compete very well in basketball. I mean, you look at the Directors Cup standings every year, and BYU would be right up there in the top of the Big 12 in terms of their overall sports program. So I believe that overall sports program belongs in there. If in the end they said that and the only reason would be the Sunday play thing, which you guys have already documented, and a lot of others on a national basis that aren't tied to BYU's program have documented, is not that big of an issue. But if that becomes the deciding factor, I'd be okay. I'd be better with BYU being a Big 12 football only and staying in the West Coast Conference and other sports, because frankly the basketball and the WCC is outstanding.
It would competitively, it would be awesome to be in the Big 12 though for BYU, because they could be 4 or 5 games over 500 and still get into the NCAA tournament.
When you're the number 3 team in the WCC, you're gripping the last 3 weeks saying, oh, now we need to make it into the finals of the tournament and we can lose, but it has to be Gonzaga in the finals that we lose to. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of strength of depth in the league, well, the Big 12 is one of the premier conferences in the country. They're going to get multiple teams every year. And you're right. If you win in the preseason and have a couple good quality games and finish in the middle of the pack in the conference in the Big 12, you still have a great chance to get in the NCAA tournament. So, it's a better conference, no question, and one of the premier programs in the history of college basketball in Kansas in that conference. So it would be exciting for BYU to play. And with the talent that they just got back from missions that they've got for the next several years, could there be a better time for this basketball program to step into one of the premier conferences in the league?
And that brings the question of, if BYU is invited, when do we think it will be? I would love for it to be 2017. That's pretty quick.
I would love it to be 2017. And here's the thing, and I don't know, and now this is not from anything I've heard from anybody or any of my friends back in the Midwest, but I'm thinking about it. What if BYU, who can just move with ease, doesn't have any issues with getting out of a conference from a football basis, doesn't have to give any notice to anybody, so they're turnkey, and that's got to be an advantage to BYU. What if they said we're going to expand and BYU's in 2017 and we're phasing these other schools in over time, but we're going to put BYU in right now? That would be fantastic. It would be hard because you would think you would need 2
Probably
for scheduling.
Need pairs, but interesting.
Yeah.
And this headline would the question mark would be taken off.
That's
exclamation point would be put on.
We want an exclamation point. And I hope that there's an announcement. I don't know what year it's going to be, but it would be really nice for BYU to play with that wind behind them in this football season. With as brutal as this schedule is this year, with the new staff, I believe that would give BYU like some mental momentum going into the fall, knowing that they're going to make that transition. And a lot of recruiting is done during the season when players that are going to be seniors, that are seniors, are coming in to watch games in your stadium. It's going to change BYU's recruiting. It's already going to change because of Kalani and the staff. You give them the thumbs up for the Big 12, and you watch the recruiting classes take a step up in football and basketball.
Now we're talking.